Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Weaver, Director of Community Engagement at TRIAD, Vanderbilt's Autism Institute. I use she and her pronouns. I have light brown hair and blue eyes, and I'm wearing a gray shirt with off-white sweater. And I'm seated in my office with a bookcase of books and various items in the background. TRIAD empowers autistic people and those with other disabilities by honoring their identities across all endeavors. This is accomplished through strengthening direct service and education for all people with disabilities and by bolstering the support and advocacy of their caregivers, communities, and the professionals who serve them. Parnassus Books and TRIAD are thrilled to share tonight's event featuring author, actor, director, and speaker, Mickey Rowe. He's here to talk about his latest book, Fearlessly Different, an autistic actor's journey to Broadway's biggest stage. Please note you can buy copies of Fearlessly Different with signed book plates from Parnassus Books. We'll go ahead and put the link to order in the Facebook comments and YouTube description for you. We'll also put a link to learn more about and donate to TRIAD. If you have questions for Mickey, please go ahead and put those in the Facebook comments and YouTube chat, and Mickey will do his best to answer them throughout the course of the evening. This evening, Mickey will be in conversation with Emelyne Bingham, who is a senior lecturer in music theory and cognition and a research member of Vanderbilt Kennedy Center and the chair of the Tennessee Autism Council and an autistic self-advocate. Mickey will also be joined by Colin Peterson, who is the Associate Director of Education at Nashville Children's Theater. I'm so pleased to turn it over to Mickey Rowe, Lynn Bingham, and Colin Peterson.
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you all so much for being here today. It is such an honor to be here. I'm Mickey Rowe. My pronouns are he, him. If you are blind or low vision, please know that I'm a white man with light brown hair. I have glasses on, a white V-neck t-shirt, and a gray blazer with like a blue flower in it. And I'm coming from Seattle on the unceded land of the Duwamish people.
Hi, I'm Colin Peterson. I'm the Director of Education at Nashville Children's Theater, and on lands that were unceded from the Yuchi, Shawnee, Cherokee, and Chickasaw First Nations. I use he, him pronouns. I have light brown hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing dark blue glasses, a dark blue short sleeve shirt with some yellow patterns on it, and I'm seated in my office with bookcase of books and items from my teaching and work in the background, including a rubber chicken. And I'll pass it over to Emelyne.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Emelyne, or Lynn Bingham, and I'm in my home, which is in the hunting grounds of the Chickasaw Indians and are the indigenous people. I am a white woman with blonde hair, and I'm wearing a St. Patrick's Day Nashville Predators jersey. I'm seated in my office, we're surrounded by all kinds of knickknacks and diplomas and photographs. And I'm glad to be here.
So Mickey, what made you want to write this book?
I wrote this book for a couple of reasons. I think one of the reasons that I wrote this book is I'd seen so much academic writing about disability by really, really, really brilliant people, a lot of whom are named in the acknowledgments at the beginning of the book. And yet, no matter what I saw being written or talked about within the disability community, I hadn't seen it really gaining traction outside of the disability community. I think that a lot of people outside of the community didn't really know what autism was, what it was like being autistic, what it's like being disabled. And so I tried to figure out what I could do to do my small part to change that however much I could. And I thought, since I'm a storyteller and a theater person, that maybe if I took some of the more academic pieces, more of the lived experience that's been written about in terms of systematic issues, and instead of writing about it the way that it's been written about so brilliantly so many times, if I tried to incorporate it into a story and write a really personal story that would hopefully resonate with people really well, while sneaking in some information and some structure of what it's like to be disabled and autistic and some of the things that we face and try to overcome, that maybe they would resonate with a different crowd of people outside of the disability community a little bit more. And I also think that people often try so hard and want so desperately to fit in. So people want so badly to fit in that often I think people forget what makes them stand out. And I think whether you are disabled or not, whether you are autistic or not, your differences truly are your strengths. Often autistic people and disabled people, I think, can feel like they're a burden. And I'm sure other people can sometimes feel like they're a burden because of the things that make them different too, for whatever makes you feel different or whatever you feel like your weaknesses are. And so I really wanted to also encourage people who felt like they were different, that your differences truly are your strengths, and that you are giving the world such a huge, huge gift when you share all of you with the world. So I think that's why I wanted to write the book.
I love it. I'm so being a theater person, I have taken so much of what you have written about into the practice that we're working through in at the Children's Theater in Nashville, trying to be an inclusive space and trying to be more inclusive space, like always working towards, taking that step beyond accessibility. And we are, so much of this book was in that personal connection, like having those personal connections, having that story being not in an academic sense, but being in that storytelling sense was such a refreshing and such a really important piece of work. Honestly, I really think that this is an important piece of work that you've done.
Thank you so much.
No, truly. And it's not just because you're here or, this panel, like it's this, so many people I've talked to about some of the quotes that I've pulled from this and talked about, your experiences auditioning and how a simple request of having enlarged type for your sides, being a side being what actors are given prior to audition for a part. They just that simple ask is so often met with friction and the desire to not make it hard or unfair for the non-disabled folks. It's just like I find that to be such an eye-opening aspect of this book, and I think that it's just an incredible piece of work. So well done, truly. Yeah.
I think often when people with disabilities ask for reasonable accommodations, sometimes people who don't have disabilities can get a little irked because they've already set up their systems and have their ways of doing things and can feel like they're making something unfair by giving that reasonable accommodation. But something I really like to remind people of is when we think about making things accessible for everyone, we are actually helping ourselves too. Like non-disabled people, when you are making things accessible for everyone, you're also helping yourself. I think about when I'm pushing my kids in a stroller on the sidewalk, right? And there's two of them and they're big now. Two of them that fit in the stroller and they're big now. And if I'm pushing my kids in the stroller, I'm gonna use those curb cuts because it makes my life easier as a dad pushing a stroller, right? People who use wheelchairs need the curb cuts. But as someone who doesn't need it, it still makes my life a lot easier and nicer. Or if I'm watching a video on YouTube or on Instagram, I like those captions because that way I can still watch the video in a dentist's office or in a waiting room or on public transportation, even if I don't have my headphones. So even though I'm not deaf or hard of hearing, it still makes my life easier. Even like a ramp at an airport. If I'm at an airport pulling my luggage and I see that ramp there, and I see the stairs, I'm gonna pull my luggage up the ramp because it makes my life easier. So I think that really, I hope people see from the book that when we include disabled people and when we learn from disabled people, we make our own lives easier as well. Because everyone, and everyone too, may be disabled one day as well. Should they be should everyone be lucky enough to live long enough, you too will get to join Emelyne's and my prestigious club at some point.
I wonder if you might talk about, sort of hinging on the social versus medical model of disability, and sort of, we sort of live by this binary, either disabled or non-disabled, and particularly with autism, where the line is especially blurry, I guess is the best word I can come up with. What do you think about about keeping that line, or maybe even erasing that line at some point, so we don't have this binary place anymore, that we're all just variations of neurodivergence?
That is so brilliant. I love that so much, and I'd never heard that or thought about that quite that way, of getting rid of the disability binary, and that is so brilliant. So sometimes I think our society thinks about disability in terms of an individual, that a disability is something an individual has, that there's something wrong with this individual, or something that needs to be cured or fixed or made whole. And I think what the book is trying to do, and what everyone here on the Zoom call with me is also trying to do, is instead of making it seem like a disability is something that's wrong with an individual or needs to be fixed with an individual or made whole, that instead everyone is perfect. Every human being is perfect in exactly the way they should be. And what we just need to change and fix or heal instead is our society. And that if we can change our society to make our society accepting and inclusive and accessible, then I totally agree. I totally see a world in which disability doesn't need to exist anymore, because we have designed everything so that everything is accessible for everyone, and everyone can get the accommodations they need to have equal opportunities to be productive and creative in this world. Yeah. So brilliant.
Let me just go one step further. So in this, just so for some of our listeners to talk about what the medical model, so the medical model is the deficit model, right? Yeah. And then the social model is the difference model. And so if you might take a picture of someone, we'll just call him James. Okay, so James is in a wheelchair, and James is at the bottom of this giant flight of steps, and in that model, the medical model, it is the steps that are disabling James, right? As opposed to, for instance, in the social model, where James could access through, say, for instance, an elevator or something like that. So it's really the sort of the status quo of the the non-disabled person, right? That's created the environment that disables some people.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So what do you think the steps are for someone with autism?
That is such a good question. You're coming with the hard-hitting good questions. I love it. I think you know what, and I can't speak for everyone on the autism spectrum, obviously, but I can speak for myself. And I think those steps, those big barriers for me and my life and in the book, are employment, majorly. I know that it's estimated 85% of college graduates on the autism spectrum are unemployed. And in many states still, even if someone is employed, nationally still, minimum wage is not a guarantee in exchange for employment for people with disabilities. In Washington state, where I live, that just changed at the very start of the pandemic, maybe 2.5 years ago. But nationally still, people with disabilities aren't even necessarily guaranteed minimum wage in exchange for work. But I think the solutions are so simple. I think really they're easy fixes. I think about in my life, I had to street perform to make ends meet. I had to still walk on the street busking as a single dad with full custody of my autistic kid as well to make ends meet because I couldn't get jobs elsewhere. But the places that really tripped me up and got in my way mostly were that interview stage where people want small talk and people want handshakes and eye contact. And people really see that as being the best indicator of how well someone is going to do a job that might have nothing to do with handshakes or eye contact or interviews, which is so frustrating. So I wish instead what people did to remove those steps, to remove that barrier, was offer working interviews maybe, where instead of these handshakes and eye contact and small talk, which can be so difficult for an autistic person to navigate on equal footing as a non-autistic person might. Instead, maybe they say, okay, for your interview, we're just going to let you do your job for a day. We're going to just let you show us how you do the job. And you're going to get to do the job you love and that you're so good at. And we'll just watch you do your job. And that will be the interview. I think it would be so much more productive and so much better and put autistic people and non-autistic people on so much more even footing so that we didn't have to be bagging groceries like I was doing 2 months ago, or still walking on the street busking with a hat out like I have done most of my life. I also think the paradigm shift you were talking about is something we need to do for all employers too. And that's part of the reason I wrote the book as well. I really want all people, all employers, non-disabled people, to realize that autistic folks and disabled folks are some of the best creative problem solvers in the world, right? Because we've had to be brilliant creative problem solvers to navigate this world that wasn't necessarily designed with us in mind. And who wouldn't want to hire those people on their team? Who wouldn't want to hire people onto their team who are already creatively problem solving every day? I think autistic people so frequently solve problems, come at solving a problem in different ways than non-autistic people, just because we're thinking about the problems from different angles and different ways. And what a blessing that would be to have all sorts of different individuals on your team who are all thinking about problems and coming at things from different directions. Like, diversity and inclusion is only going to benefit employers. Did that answer your question a little bit, I hope?
Absolutely. It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking it.
Yeah, I think this goes to what you talked about in the book about inaccessibility being the design standard, like how accessibility is always like an afterthought, and that, you know, what you were speaking to earlier, especially in some of the work that I'm doing with all the young people that we serve, is that, you know, good teaching is good teaching. So whatever is good for one particular student, whatever that student might need, is good for every student, because regardless of whatever that one particular student might need, there's another student that we might not have, you know, the label that young person has, right? That's going to help that other young person. And so that doesn't have that label. And so, and might be going through all those things, because human beings, we categorize stuff, right? If we have a label on something, it makes us, oh, we understand this now, right?
It's easier to put people in boxes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so hard to break all of these boxes. Yeah. And going into a question about the book that kind of relates to that, you know, you talk briefly about your childhood, and you talk about how, and it was not an easy childhood for you. You know, it was a very abusive childhood, to be completely honest, in the what you describe. And do you, now that you are, I don't know, successful in the center serving sense, has there been any kind of work with, or has it been, not repair isn't the right word, but has there been any like branches being reached out to you from other folks in your family in regards to that? Because now that you have been, because before you were not considered successful because you weren't getting the job, you weren't following the script, right? And now that you have more eyes on you, has that changed anything?
I don't know. You know, my dad is awesome, and my parents split up when I was like right before I entered college. Right before I entered college, my parents split up. And I think that was very freeing for my father.
Yeah.
Very freeing for my dad. And so my dad has really been so much more active and a part of my life, and been so much more, or been more free to be the dad he might have always otherwise been, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So my dad and I have an awesome relationship. He came to the book event that I did last night at Town Hall Seattle, and he has been so helpful as we try to piece together minimum wage jobs and 4 kids and childcare. He's been such an awesome help in my life. Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, I just, because I didn't hear that later in the book, and I was just curious about that. So I love that, and I think that's great. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also been, oops, sorry, go for it. You just unmuted. I don't know what I was going to say. I think also it's been really great to have mentors of mine, like folks from Seattle, like Rita Giomi and folks from Seattle Children's Theater reaching out to me now, and folks from the other families that I've created reaching out to me now has been super, super nice. And I think another interesting thing is, you know, you mentioned how my childhood read to you in the book, but in the moment, as I was living it, I knew I was not happy. Yeah. I was very happy when I was at with my grandparents for sure. But, you know, I think for a lot of kids, it's just as normal. Whatever your life is normal for you. And I don't know that I even ever got a chance to process that until Helen and I met. I have an awesome wife now, and we are a blended family. So we're like a Brady Bunch for the 21st century with 4 kids combined. And when Helen and I got together, I realized for the first time, really, I felt safe. And for the first time, I felt loved in this way that I'd never really felt it before. And all of a sudden, with those feelings, I also had so much, all of a sudden, deep sadness that I'd never felt before. Because I hadn't even necessarily been sad in certain ways growing up, but because I didn't know what I was missing or what things should have been like. And then all of a sudden, finding Helen and us having our awesome Brady Bunch family together of 4 kids and feeling safe enough to even think about things for the first time, that's when I really all of a sudden felt really sad as well as really happy and loved at the same time, and had to process a lot, if that makes any sense at all.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, because so much of you is in this book, like so much of your personal life. I think what makes so much of this sing is the fact that you put so much of you. It's not just like, you know, your experience as an actor, but it's your experience as a father, your experience as a husband, your experience as, you know, a person who is close to, you even described, did you say that you were homeless, unhomed, or that you were close to unhomed, or?
I've never been close to homeless. We've been super poor and on food stamps, even just, I have always had a very hard time finding employment and finding employment that paid minimum wage and wasn't street performing. But I've always been lucky enough to have apartments to live in. Sometimes subsidized apartments, but I've always had a place. But I appreciate what you say about the book feeling really deeply personal. I think part of that is, two parts. I'll break this into two parts. One, I think as an autistic person, I have had to feel vulnerable my whole life, because I think, and tell me if this is similar to your experience, Emelyne, but for me, often people think autistic folks don't want to connect with other people or don't want to be friends with anyone. And that couldn't be further from the truth from my experience. But I feel like so much of my life has been reaching for human connection, trying so desperately to make human connection, but more often than not failing horribly at it, trying really hard and failing and trying really hard and failing. And so I've had no choice but to be vulnerable in that way my whole life. Every time I try to make a human connection, I feel really, really vulnerable, because I don't know whether it's going to succeed. I don't even, if it does succeed or doesn't succeed, I don't even really understand why it succeeded this time or why it didn't succeed. So I felt super vulnerable my whole life, just trying to make good human connections, and hopefully they succeed, but normally they fail. And because of that, I think it's no biggie for me to be vulnerable in a book or on stage, because when you have to be vulnerable in real life every day, it feels so much less scary and less like a big deal to be vulnerable in a book or be vulnerable on stage. Yeah, and then, yeah, I had a part two, but I forgot what I was going to say.
There's something nice about having low expectations, right? If you're not sure it's going to go through, oh, well,
Absolutely.
maybe try next time. So I guess, one of the things I often have parents of children with autism ask me advice on a range of things, and particularly on how to, help their children do whatever, and and they might feel really sad that their child might be picked on a little bit at school, and I'm kind of like, well, just kind of get used to it. And for the most part, I think a lot of times children with autism really don't have enough social knowledge to really know it. So I said it's probably harder on you than it is on your child, and that's okay, right? But I often wonder in those cases what I would say to a young child. And I'm wondering what you might say if you had the opportunity to speak to young Mickey, what you might say to young Mickey with what you know now.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree with you 100% that often when I was being picked on or bullied outside of the home, I didn't necessarily realize it at the time. There's a story in the book where an artistic director at a theater called me to apologize on other people's behalf. And this was my first time realizing what was happening, is listening to her apologize on the phone to me. And I'm putting two and two together and realizing how different my perception of this situation was from other folks' perception as I'm on the phone listening to her speak to me. So I totally agree with that. But I think what I would say to young people who may be being bullied is, one, anytime someone is bullying you or being unkind to you or mean to you, 90% of the time it has way more to do with them and their feelings about themselves than it has to do about you. Really, it has nothing to do with you at all and everything to do with the other person. So feel free to just ignore it, keep your chin up, and just keep doing all the awesome things that you're doing, knowing that you're doing awesome things and having fun and learning or being interested in different subjects, while they're probably feeling so lost and not knowing what to do that the only thing they can come up with to do is to obsess over other people like you and make fun of you. And then the other thing I would say is to maybe be kind to and have grace for those people who are bullying you, because I think we are always more cruel and unkind to ourselves than we are to other people. And we're always hard. I think everyone is just always hardest on themselves. So maybe if someone is bullying you or being unkind to you, they probably aren't being, when they talk, their voice in their head talking to themselves and how they feel about themselves and speak to themselves, they probably are also not being very kind to themselves either, I would think. So maybe just have one, let it roll off your skin because it really has nothing to do with you and is not about you at all. And two, have sympathy for that person and be kind to them anyway, because they're probably really sad and probably also being even more unkind to themselves than they are being to you.
And also just a reminder for folks, if you have any questions for Mickey, pop them in the YouTube or the Facebook chat. But, you know, Mickey, you founded the National Disability Theater, and then you stepped down from it. But can you talk about why, for folks who might not know about what that is, what that organization is and what it does?
Yeah. So I was feeling really frustrated. I was so lucky. I was so lucky to get to play Christopher Boone in The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime and to get to be the first autistic actor to play Christopher Boone. And after that, I didn't get any shows or any other roles. And anytime that I got auditions for other shows, I'd only get auditions if autism or autistic were the first word in the character's description in the script. And I felt like when I was seeing people cast, at that time, when I was seeing people casting autistic people, often the feeling that I got from the verbiage around it was that theaters almost felt like they were doing an act of charity by including autistic folks, that they were doing charity to us. So I wanted a bunch of disabled folks to get together, and I'm trying to be so professional and awesome and sexy and powerful and killer that we showed a bunch of theaters that, no, actually, you're lucky to have us. You're not doing us an act of charity. You're lucky to have us. And to show the reasons why casting disabled people, hiring disabled people is so exciting, even more exciting, I think, sometimes for audiences than not casting disabled people or hiring disabled people. So we created this company that we did plays. We partnered with large existing theaters that had the money and resources. And then we brought the disability knowledge and people. And we did plays that were written by, directed by, designed by, acted by professional, incredible, top of their game autistic or disabled folks. And it was super awesome. And I think really exciting too. Super exciting because when you're, if let's say you're costuming a person who uses a wheelchair, and we know that sometimes people can be uncomfortable around disability, unfortunately, in our society. But when you have a costume designer who also uses a wheelchair, they can be so brilliant and creative and come up with so many mind-blowing things that no one else in the audience has even thought about before. Or when you have a set designer who is deaf and hard of hearing, they can come up with such brilliant, ingenious ways to, first off, just design an incredible set and also incorporate captioning into that set in ways that don't feel like an afterthought or something that we're slapped on because of accessibility, but something that actually explodes with storytelling of itself and feels like a creative choice that was intentional from the start in its own. So that's what we did there.
Yeah, and I think that that's so incredible. And I also loved the description of how you were using visual descriptions in the sound design during the play. I was just like reading that section, and it made me as a creative person who directs the plays with young folks and on small scale, but it is such a beautiful idea of, having these things that folks would consider to be an afterthought, but also something that is like the other, something that is other, and making it central is such an incredible piece of, it's incredible design idea. It really made me think about what creative work could be done around that kind of work. So
it's just exciting.
It's really exciting.
Accessibility is just good storytelling. It's just good storytelling.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering what's on the horizon for you now.
Oh yeah.
What's next?
That is such a good question. So, I have spent this pandemic not doing theater very much because none of us have. I've been working at a grocery store for much of the pandemic, but my book has just come out. And so my hope is for the future is that if enough people read the book and are excited about the book, that I'll be able to go start speaking to more people about accessibility and about medical model versus social model of disability and about how to make their work accessible and also just how to be inclusive. So my hope is that I can transfer from the hourly work that I've been doing to doing more things like that I'm really excited about and passionate about. If people enjoy the book and enjoy the story that they read in the book.
We have a question from the chat. This is from Jordan Scott. Jordan works with, hey Jordan. Jordan works with a production company called Backlight Theater in Franklin, Tennessee, working with young people, or not young people, but working with people with IDD and doing theater. And she's incredible. And the work that they are doing is incredible. And her question is, what advice would you give to someone with a disability who wants to pursue theater professionally?
I would say, just do it, because here's why. When you think about what storytelling is, there is no specific way a person needs to be or look or sound or move to have stories in their life and to tell stories. Stories are just about living, breathing human beings, and you are a living, breathing human being. So there are going to be people out there who want to tell your story or want to tell a story that they feel would be even more exciting if they cast you in, specifically, not just in spite of, but because of your disability. Because I think about Amadeus even. Amadeus is not specifically a story about disability in any way. It's not about autism. But as soon as you cast an autistic actor in the role of Mozart, it just ignites the story in a whole new way. It makes the story so much more interesting in a way that it maybe hasn't been before. So do it. And what I would say is find the communities that are already advocating for people with disabilities. I'm going to throw out a name, which is Gail Ford Williamson, who is an agent in LA, who, and I'll give you another name too, is Keely Catwells, who is a manager. And both of them are doing incredibly awesome work to push forward people with disabilities. So I would say connect with them if you can. Tell them I sent you if you want to. And just trust that you are enough, that you are just as human and alive and valuable. You are just as worthy of being center stage as anyone else. So go into interviews or auditions knowing that you are giving those people a real gift by letting them meet you.
Love it. Thank you. We had two other questions from the chat.
Yeah.
There's one from Katie Wood. She says, hey, I teach drama at the Piedmont School for Atlanta, School for Autistic Students. As an allyistic teacher, is there anything specific that I can do to make my students more comfortable in class?
Can you read that one more time? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you got it. So Katie asks, as an ally teacher, is there any,
Yeah, keep going, that's fine.
No, sorry. Is there anything specific that I can do to make my students more comfortable in class? She teaches at a school for autistic students.
Oh, absolutely. And I think sometimes there's a word that you might hear in conversations around autism called allistic.
That's the word.
I didn't read it right. Autistic.
Yeah.
And I think that might be the word.
My bad. Yeah.
No worries. But she's also an ally teacher as well.
Sorry, Katie.
And I think what you can do is follow your students' lead at times, is to trust that your students are sometimes the experts in their own lived experience, and definitely also the experts in what they need. So if a kid says that they need to sit down and watch an activity, maybe trust that that's really what they need, and that they will be so much more focused and engaged doing that than participating. Or even if a kid seems like maybe they are not focused, they might not be. So like, you as a teacher, feel free to make them focus if you think that's what's going on. But also think for a second, could this person possibly be focusing in the best way that they can right now in this moment, even if that doesn't look like what I would expect, if them pacing around in the back of the room looking at the floor is actually what they need to do to listen best in class. But I'm sure that those are all things you are already doing because you're so brilliant.
And we have one more question from Courtney. Courtney S. I recently discovered my autism and definitely also struggle with connecting with people, although I definitely want to. Do you have any words of hope for autistic people looking for love?
I definitely do. So I was told my whole life and made to believe by society my whole life that I would be so lucky if anyone wanted to marry me. That I was told that it would take a really special person to want to marry you, or that I would just be really, I think a lot of people with disabilities are told they will be so lucky if they find someone who wants to marry them. And that's not true at all. I mean, you are lucky, but not in the way people are meaning. So I would say, hold out and know that there is no pressure, that there are going to be so many people who love you so much in so many different ways for so many different reasons. And you just need to be patient till you find them. Because I thought that I would be lucky if anyone wanted to marry me, I married the first person who showed any interest in wanting to be with me. And it became a really, really abusive relationship for me and my kids until I was finally brave enough and strong enough to get out of that relationship. But I think the only reason that I think so many people with disabilities and people with autism get into abusive situations because they think it is the best thing that they can get, that they think they don't have any other options. They think there aren't other people who would want to be with them, or they feel like a burden. So I would say, just know that there are so many people who are going to want to be with you and want to love you. And the best thing you can do is know your own self-worth and hold out for someone who you really feel special about, and someone who really makes you feel safe and who really respects you and treats you better than you treat yourself. And just be patient and know you have all the time in the world, and that everything society has told you about it being about disabled people being burdens, or about about you being lucky if you find anyone to date or marry, that's not true. And you can just drown out that noise and be patient and wait till you find the right person. And you will be so much better for it, so much happier for it. And that it is so much better to wait for the right person than to get stuck in something that is scary that you don't want to be a part of. And it's really easy to get stuck in something scary that you don't want to be a part of. I hope that answered your question, Courtney.
It's interesting, isn't it? And I see this sort of common theme going through of sort of who controls the narrative of what should be. And, you know, it's the non-disabled power dynamic, because the spaces are designed, the schools are designed, the workplaces are designed, the grocery stores are designed, whatever, are designed for the non-disabled person. And so for us, as a community, and I think particularly for those of us, you know, with autism, having to really find the piece of the narrative that is ours, and finding something that is something that we can actually.
Oh no, am I still here?
You're still here. Oh, Lynn, you jumped out for just a second. So you,
sorry.
You find the piece of the narrative that is for you. And
so
but I completely agree with
the narrative that we feel like we can do something with.
I completely agree with that. 100%. And what I'll say is, even in bookstores, right? Even in bookstores like Parnassus, I think about the stories that are being told about disability and about autism. And I think about The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime that was written by a non-autistic, someone who claims to be non-autistic, with little to no research done into autism. In the author's own words, little to no research done into autism. I think about Me Before You, right? A book written by a non-autistic person, which was turned into movies written by and acted by non-disabled people, where disabled folks are told that they're such a burden, the kindest thing they can do for their loved ones is to kill themselves so as not to be a burden. I think about, there are so many stories. You all watching can think of so many millions of stories about disability, none of which have actually been written by or consulted with actually disabled people. And so that's why it is so, so important. And I'm so, so excited for people to start reading books written by, and stories written by autistic people and written by disabled people, and to see how our culture might shift and how the paradigms might shift when we get to start telling our own stories. Because people with disability, I think about theater too, how theaters are starting to do more sensory-friendly performances and starting to do more relaxed performances. But autistic people and disabled people, we don't just want to be audience members, we want to be employed, and we want to help shape the stories about us from the inside, just like any other minority group would want to have a hand in shaping the public stories that shape public perception about our group.
If I can just dovetail onto that,
yes, go for it.
I'm a conductor and have long worked with many orchestras and so forth, and these sensory friendly performances make me so sad. Mm-hmm. Because that's great that these spaces are made available and there's effort taken to try to make them more comfortable and whatever, accommodating and whatever reason, but for those particular children, they're not able to necessarily see themselves. There's no one with whom they can identify that's someone like them. And the presiding bishop of the American Episcopal Church, Michael Curry, said something what I thought was brilliant. And he said, "You cannot be what you cannot see." Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think when we start looking at how we become more intentional about including children with disabilities into these kind of spaces, that we provide a mechanism for them to be able to see themselves on that stage or in that orchestra pit or doing the lighting or whatever that they want to do. But that obviously goes back to employment. But we need to really push this idea of inclusion, which is pretty much undefined in the literature. Lauren Weaver and I have tried to do so in some articles, but to really push it to where the goal is a contribution.
Absolutely. Well, and that people with disabilities need to see positive role models who are going to tell them that if you're different, if you access the world differently, the world needs you. And when we exclude people with disabilities from even being a part of the telling of stories that are entirely about disability, it doesn't help to accomplish that, I think. I think that's our time. But thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much to Parnassus as well for having us here today to get to talk about autism and disability and theater and inclusion. And you can get the book Fearlessly Different in the comments, I think, and or the YouTube description. And there's also a place to donate to your organization, Emelyne, in the comments as well.
Y'all should pick it up, seriously. If you're a theater person, non-theater person, it's an incredible read. Truly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mickey, for being here. We really, really, really appreciate it. I'm so thankful for being a part of this. So thank you for letting us into your world. It's really nice of you, kind of you.
Same here. Thank you so much, Mickey. It was great.
Thank you.